All right, everybody hear me now?
Yep.
Good. All right. My name is Jeff, and I'm from the Pump Room. I'm one of the brewers of the Pump Room, and I'm here to talk to you today about my quest for better beer. Little background for me. I grew up just like everyone else on the yellow fizzy stuff that's mass-produced, mass-made, and marketed as such for the people. And just like wine drinkers, I felt that the beer didn't really have any substance to it. There wasn't anything in there that really piqued my interest. So one day in California back in 1992, I ran into this thing called Pete's Wicked Ale. And the guy was there giving samples. And he gave me a sample of that beer. And that beer had full body, lots of flavor, nice aroma to it. And I'm like, wow, what is this? And he's like, oh, this is craft brewed beer. I'm like, that's nothing like beer I've ever had. He's like, no, you never had this before. Little did I know, craft brewing action in the States had been going on already for about 7 years in its current form. But from then on, I stopped drinking the yellow fizzy stuff, the mass-produced beers, unless I couldn't find it any other drinkable beer anyplace else, and of course I drink it. So let's start off by what is beer. How many beer drinkers do we have in the group here? Okay, so hey, it makes my job easy. Anybody favorite beer?
Stout.
Stella?
Stout.
Oh, stout. Okay, so like Guinness.
Not quite beer.
Okay, no, it's beer. It is beer. Yeah, absolutely. Where do you find yourself drinking that at?
Generally at home or parties.
Home or parties, socializing with friends, groups. Who else had their hand up? Sir over there, what's your favorite beer?
Probably Tuborg.
Tuborg, okay, good. We've already seen two different styles of beer, but still mass-produced beers in their own right. Okay, mass-produced as far as world recognition and so on. So, beer is a full-flavored product to me. It has, just like wine, it has to have character. It just can't be plain and emotionless. Sorry. So, roughly there's 5 styles of mainstream beers. You have your light lagers, and light lagers are such as Tiger, Budweiser, Coors, and they're defined by light lagers because they're light in color, light in flavor. It's kind of light in alcohol, light in aroma. They're basically, to me, it's like drinking water. If you ask me, I'm partial. I'm sorry. And to brew those beers, they use what's called adjuncts to lighten the beer. So instead of just putting the malt in there and the hops and the water and the yeast, they also add an adjunct to bring up the gravity but keep the color light, such as sugar, corn, or rice. Okay. So we also have regular lagers like Heineken. Heineken is still an all-grain beer. It's nothing but 100% barley. You have your stouts such as Guinness and ABC Stout locally. You have wheat beers such as Erdinger and Hoegaarden. And then you have your other ale groups such as, what's the other one I was trying to think of? Anyway, you have your ale groups. Sorry. Then you have craft brew. Now, craft brew beer, unlike mass-produced beer, which is usually in a kind of like a lab environment, there's usually a command center, lots of computers, and when you see someone that works at a place, say Tiger or Budweiser, they don't consider themselves a brewer, they consider themselves a technologist. They're a technician. All they do is they sit at a screen and watch it. Okay, when it reaches this point, we move it on to the next point. And then another technician takes over and does the same thing until they get to the final product. Craft brews, we go from grain to glass. So basically I take the grain, I crush the grain, mash the grain, sparge the grain, boil the wort, add the yeast, ferment the beer. Well, the yeast ferment the beer, but I monitor that process, transfer, age it, so on and so forth. So I do grain from grain to glass. And there's 97 official styles of beer, including your light lagers and your stouts and such. So there's so much more out there than what people normally find that it's, to me, that was just room for exploration. So I know there's a couple wine people in here too, so I gotta put some props into you. I like wine, but not as much as I like beer. Wine's made of grapes and yeast. Beer is made from barley water, hops, and yeast. So, and just like with grapes, beer, you have your different varieties, and you have the same thing for beer too. But since there's 4 ways of layering, and actually more than that, 4 ways of layering your complexity, then it makes for basically more variety. All right, now we get into a little bit of the history of beer, which is kind of one of my favorite parts. I consider myself a part craftsman, part historian, and part mad scientist. The gods of beer and wine both are basically run parallel tracks. They both go back, 5,000-6,000 years to ancient Sumeria, and basically when mankind stopped their nomadic lifestyle and started harvesting crops for food, is when they think that they found beer and wine. Also, you had your grain, you got your grain in from the field, left over, left out, started to make bread. But they left it outside, it got rained on, naturally occurring yeast fell into it, fermented it, boom, you got beer. Although it probably wasn't that great tasting. Same thing with wine. Leftover grapes that they couldn't eat because they're starting to go bad, they put it in a big barrel. There's naturally occurring yeast on the skins of grapes, and that's usually what fermented the first wines. It still ferments wine to this day as well. They just cultured it. And boom, you've got wine. Same thing. So ancient Sumeria, the beer goddess was Ninkasi. That was their goddess of drinks. So here's a few others. The top left, actually, that is a hieroglyph of Egypt, and that shows a man drinking a beer out of a vase with a reed straw. They're all over Egypt. The hieroglyph above it, those actually, they've been able to distinguish that beer from wine. So they can find the ones that say this is beer, and they can find the ones that say this is wine. So they know that they both existed at that time. And in the tombs of even not just the emperors or the kings, but also the workers, they found 3 types of beer and 2 types of wine that was served to them. They find them in the jars. Their god was Osiris, and even certain breweries today have actually had those jars analyzed, found out what contents were in there, and have rebrewed those beers, those ancient beers, using the ingredients that they were able to procure today. The bottom left is Silenus, ancient Greek mythology god. That seems to be the, I know, what people think of beer drinkers sometimes, kind of fat, lazy, people serving them drinks. I put that in there just for fun. And then over here to the bottom right, that is the Aztec god of alcohol. And I'm going to trash this name, I know, I think it's Tecatl or something like that. It's a really odd name, hard to pronounce. Their beer was actually made from the nectar of the century plant, so in a way it was kind of beer, wine type stuff. It didn't come from grains. And then the top right, that is St. Arnold of Metz. Now, the Middle Ages is where it gets very interesting, because in the Middle Ages, water quality was very bad. So there's a lot of dysentery going around, a lot of deaths from dysentery. But they already knew how to make beer. They had to boil beer, which killed all the bacteria. So this guy knew that. So he went around preaching the health benefits and the safety of beer, and his congregation loved him for it. So much in fact that when he died, they carried his body back to Metz. Along the way, when he was a bishop, they got thirsty, so they put him, they set him down, went into a bar, and said, "We want a drink. We're carrying Bishop Arnold. What better way to give tribute to him than to stop for a drink at a local tavern?" Well, they said, "We only have 1 cup left, 1 mug left, and that's all there is, I'm sorry." So they passed it around, everyone was satiated. They said the cup never went dry. It was the never-ending cup. And that was the miracle that the Catholic Church used to bring him to sainthood. So he is officially the patron saint of brewers. So, and brewing from then on really is regionally mostly European. There was a little bit of malt-based brewing in Asia, but because rice was more prevalent, they went to more of a rice type of a wine, like sake. And like I said, down in Aztecs in South America, it was more century plant, nectar type based stuff. So around the world in 4 ingredients. Like I said earlier, water, barley, hops, and yeast. Now, just like wine, hops grow in certain areas, certain latitudes, and that's basically it. They can't be grown every place else. They have a certain growing environment. And within those regions, just like wine, they take on the essence of that region, whether it's the soil conditions or the acidity. They take on those same aspects. So hops are a really big ingredient in beer. They didn't use it to begin with. A lot of times they used heather and flowers as their bittering agent before, because they didn't really know hops. Hops, by the way, are one of the 3 species of cannabis, along with marijuana and hemp. believe it or not. There's little glands underneath the cones on the flowers up here. Underneath the petals, there's little red sacs called dupulin glands. And those have alpha acids and beta acids. And that gives us our flavoring and our bittering and our aromas. So grains, same thing. Grains are more prevalent. They can be grown in other places, and but they are malted barley. Malted barley is just barley seeds that have been allowed to sprout, and then they stop that sprouting process by drying it back out. The endosperm inside is converted into carbohydrates, which is the energy source for a seed, as everyone pretty much knows. And then we stop that because that carbohydrate source is our source for the sugars in the beer as well. And then, just like coffee, they roast it. So you have your lightest Pilsner malt, which is the lightest malt you can get, all the way up to a malt called Black Patent. And it's called Black Patent because they made it, a company made it, and it's black and it's dark, but it's not a whole lot. There's some bitterness to it, but it's not like a burnt bitterness. And everything in between. And any combination of those grains can make a beer. That's why there's so many different styles of beer. Yeast is the same way. Certain yeast, there's two types of yeast. There's lager yeast and there's ale yeast. And those are the two real types of beer. Everything can be categorized into those. So, but with those varieties, the fermentation process, depending on the temperature that they use, how much is put in, that gives us certain ester qualities and alcohol content and so forth. And then water. Water, like wine, I mean, water is the base of beer. And unlike wine, we can add stuff to the water to change the beer. So wine doesn't really have a mineral content to it. Beer actually does. Beer has a lot of potassium, calcium. There's proteins in it, and then if it's unfiltered beer, there's a lot of B12 and B6 vitamins in it as well. So now we come to the craftsman part of the process. So beer worldwide is made of those 4 ingredients, but as a craft brewer, I'm not meant to stay within those varieties, and we can go without having those 4 main ingredients in it. For example, tonight I believe one of the beers that we're going to be having, that's supposed to be beer at dinner, I believe, is Archipelago's Samui. And Samui, that beer itself is a wheat beer, but to make it put a little local flair on it, we put a calamansi lime and pandan leaf in it. And so it kind of has a nice lime flavor to it, and then on the aftertaste of it, you're going to get kind of a bready pandan leaf flavor out of it. And as craft brewers, we love to experiment with stuff like that, with different spices, berries, fruits, vegetables, anything. They actually made one not too long ago for someone who wanted a shiitake mushroom beer, believe it or not. And we made it, or he made it, and it tasted like mushrooms. But he also made a durian beer about 1.5 years ago, which actually was quite popular. So that's what the craftsman is, this process. The craftsman is, for me. We have a certain pride for our work, just like any other craftsman would have. And just like, say, a furniture maker and IKEA, that's the differences between ourselves and mass-produced beer. IKEA factory, it's all computer-controlled, robotic. It doesn't really have any warmth to it. But then you go to a master furniture maker who makes this beautiful desk, solid wood, beautifully finished, took them months to do. Beer takes about the same amount of time depending on the style worldwide, but still, we have that same passion for it. We have that same desire for a better, more flavorful product. So, into the environmental impacts, anybody know, is beer carbon neutral? What about wine? Is wine carbon neutral? Anybody know? Unfamiliar territory? Well, beer is and it isn't. It depends on what type of beer you're drinking and where you get it from. Wine actually is a little bit more carbon neutral than beer because usually the wineries are very close by to the vineyards. Or sometimes it's actually made on site at the vineyard itself. So there's really no extra CO2 emissions from getting those grapes into the winery. However, the growing regions for hops, some of the regions like Pacific Northwest and in Germany and in New Zealand and Australia, where they can grow hops and grain both, that's a fairly carbon neutral beer. And also a beer that's fresh out of the keg is fairly carbon neutral because it's not packaged. You don't have to worry about just getting rid of packaging or transportation and so forth. So in a way it is and it isn't. Depends on how you go. And because they absorb a lot of CO2 during the production of the seeds and the cones for the hops, it is fairly even. Not too bad. But wine has a bit of an edge. beer's going green. There's a lot of waste in beer, certain aspects of it. For every 1 gallon of beer, most breweries use 5 to 6 gallons of water, and that's a concern to us. We'd like to try to get that lower. And there's actually a symposium going on in Wisconsin next month regarding water usage in craft breweries. And they're bringing craft breweries from around the United States together, and some of them have already instituted ways of getting that down to a 3-to-1 ratio. And it's not that the water's toxic by any means. It's just like your standard gray water. It goes and can be treated and reused just like new water here in Singapore. But it's not very, still, it's a lot for a little. And also, there's a company out there called, what's it called? Think of it here in just a second. I have it on my notes. They have made a ethanol generator that's small enough that can be used by homes and by small businesses to make ethanol. And they have a little pumping station to pump it into your car and everything. And they use waste from breweries in the United States to power those ethanol generators. They put the waste in, they have a solid state process that converts it into ethanol, and then you can run your car off it. They also have a generator that can make excess generated powers, take it back to the power company, and they can get green energy credits for those power as well, because it's considered a renewable resource. And a lot of small breweries are putting in solar panels, wind generators. I know there's a gentleman here for wind turbines. There's a few that have put in wind turbines as well to help the cost of electricity, because there's a lot of electricity usage in it as well. So anybody know how many local beers there are as far as craft beer? I'm from the Pump Room. Anybody else know any place else you can go get a beer where it's made on the premise? Anybody? Anybody? Brewers, yeah, right across the river from us. Archipelago. Anybody else? There's a few more. What's that? Red Dot. Polliner. And then the newest one is Taiwan Dang, which is actually just behind Red Dot. And they're Thai food, but German beer, just like a Polliner. And the good thing is the good thing about craft brewers too is we're all friends, really. Craft brewing around the world, we don't really compete with each other as far as the product goes. And for us here, for example, we're well known for our Scottish ale and our wheat beer. Archipelago's, their flagship beer is a Samui, which is a lime wheat. Brewworks, they have a very good oatmeal stout. And Red Dot has a lime wheat as well, but they use a different type of lime. And he has a unique beer called Monster Green, which has, it's a lager or a pilsner, and it has the green moss in it. Spirulina, has spirulina in it, I'm sorry. And it creates this very, very bright green beer, almost as bright as that plastic container right there on your desk. It's almost that bright, believe it or not. It's a great St. Patrick's Day beer. So, and then Polliner and Taiwan Dang both are German beers. They do light, a dark, and a wheat. They're kind of isolated because of their, Reinheitsgebot treaty, which kind of makes you a little bit limited in the type of beers you can make. So, in essence, I forgot, go back one, can't. Also, for beers from around the world, there's quite a few places around here as well. There's, let's see, can I go back on this here? There is, what's the name of space? Sorry, I had that on the slide so I wouldn't have to remember it. There's bottle places. For instance, yesterday I was down at a place called the Brewhaus. It's down at off of Newton. There you go. Thank you. They have beers from around the world, all over the place. It's a great place to go and sample beers if you want. Belgium, they even have Egyptian beer. They have stuff from Chile, from everywhere. Brussels Sprouts is mostly Belgian beers. If you want to have some Belgian beers, you can go there. Charlie's Corner has a variety of European beers, as well as east of Avalon. All those have bottled beers. You can go and get sample different beers from around the world and really expand your mind about what beer really is to get yourself into more of those 97 varieties. So just remember, craft beer, is it considered drinking? I call it more of a social lubricant. Because honestly, yesterday or on Thursday at the Pump Room, I was behind the bar pouring myself a beer, and there was 4 guys at the bar. There was one doctor, 2 aeronautical engineers, and a plumber. And the thing about it is they weren't there because of their jobs. They were there because they were the unifying substance liquid that is beer. And that's what they were talking about the entire time. So it is a social lubricant. It gets people relaxed. People, socialize with it. Parties, barbecues, and such. You can go around the world without even leaving your city, and that's true even here in Singapore. Those places that I mentioned, you can have a beer from anywhere else in the world and sample those types of beers. It's more complex than wines. You can layer it with fruit, spices, and you can change the effect in the brewing process as well. And there's a big thing on binge drinking, and right now, binge drinking is a big thing in the States and in Europe. Craft brewing is not really associated with binge drinking. That's more of your mass-produced beers. We're more of quality, like wine, not quantity. So after that, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions,